Right then, Year 12. We are going to start our new A2 syllabus, and the first thing that we're going to look at is respiration. So before I teach you anything new, what I would like you to do is to pause this video and take 5 minutes or so to write down everything that you can remember from GCSE on respiration, both aerobic and anaerobic. Where it happens, what the reactants are, what the products are, absolutely everything that you can remember. Okay then everyone, so pause the video now and then come back to me in about 5 or 10 minutes. Right, okay, so let's see what we've managed to remember. So the first thing that I hope you managed to do was to remember the word equation for aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is what we do on a day-to-day basis. It's what you're doing now and what I'm doing now. All right, so aerobic respiration. Okay, everybody, so the word equation that you needed to know at GCSE was oxygen plus glucose goes to carbon dioxide plus water, and then what it's all about, energy. Okay, so you get the oxygen from gaseous exchange in your lungs, you get glucose from the breakdown of your food in digestion, and then we make these byproducts, carbon dioxide and water, which we don't really need. And this is what it's all about, making energy. Energy that so that you can move, keep warm, and go about all your daily lives and carry out metabolic functions. Okay, so the next thing I hope you remember was the chemical equation for aerobic respiration. So hopefully you all know that oxygen is O2, glucose is C6H12O6. You should have done a lot about glucose at the beginning of the AS module, alpha and beta. And then we have CO2 plus water, H2O. And hopefully a few of you by now know that energy in biology is represented as a molecule called ATP. Okay. So the last thing that I hope you remembered was that you have to balance this equation. So we put a 6 in front of O2. We leave glucose alone. We put a 6 in front of CO2 and a 6 in front of H2O. And there is our balanced equation for aerobic respiration. Right, okay. We're now going to go on to anaerobic respiration, but one final point, aerobic respiration takes place in mitochondria. We're going to look at mitochondria in a bit more detail later today, but there you go, aerobic respiration inside mitochondria. Right, the next thing I want us to recall from GCSE is anaerobic respiration. Now, hopefully you remember that there are actually 2 different types. The type that happens in animals and bacteria, and the type that happens in plants and fungi. So, anaerobic respiration. Okay, so anaerobic respiration happens when there isn't enough oxygen available to the cell to carry out aerobic respiration. It does not make enough energy for us animals to survive on a long-term basis, but will produce a little bit of energy, a little bit of ATP, just to get us through possibly a sprint or a tennis serve when we need that little boost. Okay, so for animals and bacteria, at GCSE, you would have learned that glucose, and it's all by itself, it's got no oxygen, therefore turns into lactic acid. All right, and a small amount of energy, a small amount of ATP. Okay, now thankfully at GCSE you did not need to know the chemical symbols for lactic acid and you didn't need to know the balanced equation. Right, let's have a look now at plants and fungi. Specifically with fungi, yeast. Okay, right, so again, we just have glucose, no oxygen available. But this time, instead of making lactic acid, we make ethanol, which is used in the brewing industry, in fermentation, all right, produces alcohol, and also carbon dioxide. And also a small amount of energy again. So the ethanol is used in the brewing industry, carbon dioxide they use in the baking industry with yeast because the carbon dioxide makes the bread rise. Okay, again, you did not need to know how to balance this equation. So that is what you had to know for GCSE science. No balanced equations. The only other thing as well that you needed to know is that anaerobic respiration does not occur in the mitochondria. It occurs in cytoplasm of the cell. So both lactic acid and the ethanol and carbon dioxide anaerobic respiration take place in the cytoplasm. Hopefully none of this is new to you, okay? There's one other thing that we need to look at from GCSE, and that is the oxygen debt. I don't know if you remember that. All right, so let's just rub off the plant and fungi one because there's no oxygen debt there. Okay. So in anaerobic respiration for animals and bacteria, we produce lactic acid. Now there's a problem with lactic acid. It is very, very toxic. It causes muscle fatigue, cramps, stiff muscles the day after exercise because it's toxic. So we have to get rid of it. So after you've done exercise, you're breathless, aren't you? You start panting. And the reason why you're panting is because you're trying to get oxygen back into the system. And the reason why you try and get oxygen back into the system is because lactic acid plus oxygen makes harmless carbon dioxide and water. So you're using oxygen to break down this horrible toxic lactic acid into harmless carbon dioxide and water. So the reason why you pant after exercise is to get this oxygen into your cells to break down the lactic acid. And that is called the oxygen debt. So hopefully that has rejigged your memory on everything that you needed to know at GCSE. Okay, there's one other thing I want you to do for me before we go on to looking at aerobic respiration today in more detail, is I would like you now to pause this video and I would like you to cast your minds back to when you learned all about the different organelles of the cell at the beginning of the AS course. And I would like you to draw me a mitochondria and label all its different parts. All right, so pause the video now and take 5 minutes out to draw a mitochondria. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you've all drawn yourself a little mitochondria. So hopefully you've all drawn an oval shape. What I've drawn here is the outer mitochondrial membrane. And inside the mitochondrial membrane is another membrane, the inner mitochondrial membrane. And it's drawn, it's not drawn, it's got finger-like projections like this. And why do you think it's got finger-like projections? Well, just like microvilli inside the small intestine and alveoli inside the lungs, it's to increase the surface area. So this here then is the inner mitochondrial membrane. And this space in between the outer and the inner is called the intermitochondrial space. Now that will become more important as we go on through all the different stages of aerobic respiration. Okay, so these finger-like projections are called cristae. And what you wouldn't have known at GCSE, or maybe even at the beginning of the AS module, is that they are covered in what looks like lollipops. Now, these are known as stalked particles. Let's just label one here, stalked particles. Okay? And they cover the surface of the cristae. They are actually an enzyme called ATP synthase. And yes, you've guessed it, their job is to make ATP later on in the respiration process. The only other thing now that I would like you to note is the jelly that's in the middle of the mitochondria, and that is known as the matrix. Okay, so we've got outer mitochondrial membrane, inner mitochondrial membrane. The folds are known as cristae. They are covered with stalked particles, which are actually an enzyme called ATP synthase. In between the inner mitochondria and the outer mitochondrial membrane, we have got something called the intermitochondrial space. And finally, the jelly in the middle is known as the matrix. And the mitochondria is where most of aerobic respiration takes place. Okay, right, whilst I go and find out what my dog's doing, because he's causing a bit of a bother out in the garden, what I'd like you to do now is to, again, pause the video and write down everything that you can remember about coenzymes and cofactors. Cast your mind back to when you did your enzymes module, probably with Mrs. Ballard, and write down what you can remember about coenzymes and cofactors. Okay? Right, I'm just going to go and sort him out. You can probably hear him. What are you doing? This is Freddie. Hello, Freddie. Right, okay. Right, okay, everybody. So, what have you remembered about cofactors and coenzymes? Okay, so what you should have remembered about cofactors and coenzymes is that they help enzymes to carry out their jobs more effectively. They also help carry things around the cell. So a cofactor tends to be an inorganic molecule, and it tends to be made from the minerals that you get example, I don't know, Ca2 plus or Na plus or Cl minus. All right? So minerals are inorganic molecules. Coenzymes, which is what I'm really interested in today, they are organic molecules, which means that they contain carbon. And they are derived from vitamins that you get in your diet. For example, vitamin B, or C, or A. Okay? Now, it's coenzymes that are involved in respiration. Very specifically, 3 types. NAD. Now, NAD actually stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. But thankfully, you don't need to know that for your exam. Just call it NAD. The other coenzyme you need to know about is FAD. And finally, coenzyme A. So all 3 of these are involved in the respiration process, but this is the most important one. This one pops up all the time in all 4 different stages of aerobic respiration, which is what we're concentrating on today. Don't worry too much about anaerobic at this stage. So I just want to take a little bit of time out with you just to look at what NAD does. Its job is, well, it's called a hydrogen carrier. Okay, so its job is to carry hydrogen from the cytoplasm into the mitochondria and then around the mitochondria. So let's just rub this out. Hopefully you've reminded yourselves what cofactors and coenzymes are, and you're happy with the fact that the 3 coenzymes that are involved in respiration are NAD, FAD, coenzyme A, and the one that we really need to know about is NAD. Okay? Okay, NAD. So first of all, I want to cast your minds back to GCSE chemistry. I know lots of you are doing chemistry A-level, but some of you won't have done chemistry since you were 16, back at the age of, year 11. So could you try and remember what this stands for? Does that ring a bell? Okay, pause the video and see if you can remember what oil rig stands for. Okay, so hopefully some of you will have remembered that oil rig stands for oxidation is loss of either electrons or hydrogen. Okay? R is reduction. So reduction is gain of electrons or hydrogen. Okay? So remember what I said. NAD, right, it helps all the enzymes in respiration. And the way that it helps them is because it carries hydrogen. So NAD is a hydrogen carrier. Okay? So when NAD is oxidized, it has no hydrogen attached to it. It has lost its hydrogen. So oxidized NAD literally looks like this, NAD. All right? When NAD has been reduced, it has got hydrogen attached to it. It has gained hydrogen. So then we either say that it is NADH, all right? Or sometimes you'll see it written down as NADH plus, H plus, all right? But both of those mean the same thing. They are reduced NAD, all right? This here is oxidized NAD. So when NAD has not got any hydrogen attached to it, it's called oxidized. And when it has got hydrogen attached to it, it's called reduced NAD. Okay, now underneath this video I have attached a little PowerPoint with more detail on NAD. This is all you need to know for your A-level. But if you're still a little bit confused, read through it and make some notes. Or if you're someone who likes to read around the subject and get more information, then that's great. But this is all that you need to know with regards to the respiration module, okay? NAD carries hydrogen. So if it has hydrogen attached to it, it becomes reduced. And if it loses its hydrogen, it becomes oxidized. Okay, just remember oil rig. Right, so what have we done? We've recapped everything from GCSE. We've looked at the mitochondria in detail. We've looked at NAD, and we now know its job. So I think what I'll now do is I will introduce you to the 4 stages of aerobic respiration. We're not looking at anaerobic today, all right? Forget about anaerobic, forget about lactic acid and ethanol and all that sort of thing. We are just looking at aerobic respiration, all right? That was the first one that we looked at. Oxygen plus glucose goes to carbon dioxide plus water and lots of energy in the form of ATP, okay? So I'm afraid, guys, it's going to get a lot more complicated. GCSE was just a little tickle, really. And now you're going to see what really goes on. So, aerobic respiration. This is the one where we have lots of oxygen, and it's what we're carrying out right now as we're sat here next to our desks. Okay, so there are 4 stages of aerobic respiration. The first one is something called glycolysis. All right. And that's what we're going to be learning next lesson in great detail. The next one is known as the link reaction. The third one is known as the Krebs cycle. And the fourth one, it sounds really scary, but don't worry. All right. Oxidative phosphorylation. Now, oxidative phosphorylation is broken up into 2 stages. The ETC, which is the electron transport chain, okay, and also chemiosmosis. So the electron transport chain, the ETC, plus chemiosmosis, when you put those 2 procedures together, make oxidative phosphorylation. Okay? Now, the other thing I want you to learn from me by the next time I see you is where these 4 stages actually happen. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm of the cell, okay? The link reaction and the Krebs cycle, they both occur in the matrix, the jelly, in the centre of the mitochondria. So matrix of mitochondria. Okay, and then this final stage, oxidative phosphorylation, occurs on the cristae, so the inner mitochondrial membrane. Let's just see if I can squeeze that on. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. So the 4 stages are glycolysis, link reaction, Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative phosphorylation is made up of the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. The link reaction and Krebs cycle happen in the matrix of the mitochondria. And finally, oxidative phosphorylation occurs on the cristae, which makes up the inner mitochondrial membrane. Okay, guys. So, quite a lot of revision from GCSE and a little bit of new information for you to take on board. So when I see you again on Thursday, we are going to do this in detail, okay? And it'll probably The link reaction will take a lesson, the Krebs cycle will take a lesson, and then the oxidative phosphorylation will possibly take 2 lessons. So I would like you to stop this video now. I would like you to revise ATP, because that's what we did before you started revising for your mocks, wasn't it? I want you to have a look at ATP and its roles and why a cell needs it. I'd like you to revise about cofactors and coenzymes, and I'd like you to look at NAD in a little bit more detail. So as I said, I've put this information underneath this video. There'll be some questions that I'd like you to answer. Yeah, and that's it for today. All right, so I'll see you again on Thursday for glycolysis. Okay, bye everyone.